Hello. In my ongoing reviews of 1970s dystopian science fiction movies, I realize I have neglected to include the Planet of the Apes sequels, the original series, that is. Um, Starting with Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which is the first and, in my opinion, one of the best um, of the sequels, which came out in 1971. It was again written by Paul Dane, who partly wrote the script for the 1968 original, um, though part of that script was also written by Rod Serling, although he's not credited. Paul Dane wrote this second one, and it's not highly regarded, but it's actually one of my favorites. It starts out with where the original left off, with Taylor and Nova riding their horse down through the Forbidden Zone. They pass the Statue of Liberty. We know now we're in the ruins of New York City, and they're trying to find anything. Taylor is trying unsuccessfully to get Nova to speak or to understand his name, and she doesn't really seem to comprehend. Um, and he's kind of becoming frustrated. And then he sees what looks kind of like a wall of fire, a wall of flames, and he runs towards it and vanishes, leaving Nova on horseback and frightened, and she doesn't know what to do. Now we cut to another crashed spacecraft, which looks like his, but it's crashed on land, not in the ocean. And there's another astronaut named Brent, played by James Franciscus, who has come along with his skipper, who is very badly injured in the crash and is dying, has been blinded, to find out what happened to Taylor and Landon and Dodge, since they never returned. Uh, and he states that something has happened, that they've gone through a quote-unquote Hassline curve. Remember that name. And gone through us somehow through time, and that the chronometer on the ship registered the year as 3955 AD. So they've gone far, far into their future. And they don't know where they are. And Landon, Brent takes off and tries to find, where he is and what's going on. And eventually he finds Nova, who's, like I said, is on horseback and confused. And she leads him to where he can see Ape City. And in Ape City, there's a new general, General Aldo, I think his name is, played by Gregory Sierra, who is a gorilla, and he wants to send an expedition into the Forbidden Zone. Dr. Zayas, who's still by Maurice Evans, played by Maurice Evans, objects and says it's too dangerous, and you don't know what's in there, and warns that there are all these dangers and that they really need to be careful. But General Aldo doesn't care. He wants to go anyway. He's convinced that there's land there that they can use to expand the ape empire, and that they want to go get it. The chimpanzees, as usually, are neutral. They don't want war, and they don't really. We see Cornelius and Zira, but Zira is still played by Kim Hunter, but Cornelius was played by a different actor. Roddy McDowall was not available to reprise his role in this movie, though he was later. And so he's played by a different actor who sounds remarkably like Roddy McDowall. So you don't really notice, particularly that they're under the ape makeup, so you can't really see their faces. And then James Franciscus is just sort of wandering around. He's captured briefly, but due to the fact that he encounters Cornelius and Zira, he's freed, and he and Nova are left to go off on their own. Eventually, they tell them an area where they might be safe, that there's a cave, and no one's gone into it because they're frightened. But they say that this cave might lead to someplace else. Well, they find the cave and they go in, and they find, much to James Franciscus' shock, that they're in the New York subway system, and they're at the Queensboro Plaza station. And there's a lot of little in-jokes, which I enjoyed. One of them is a melted sign that says New York is a summer festival, which, I don't know, unless you'd lived in the New York City area in that period, you wouldn't get that joke, but it was a campaign to attract tourism, basically. And he finds one of those posters melted on the subway tracks, and then he's like, "Oh my God!" And he realizes where he is. Seeing broken signs from Radio City Music Hall and the New York Public Library, where the lines have kind of melted, and he eventually he keeps hearing this like whine or buzz that seems to be leading him in a certain direction, and when he starts going up a ladder from the subway tracks, the buzz stops. He says, "Oh, that's odd." And he tries it again, and the same thing happens. It buzzes until he touches the ladder and then stops. So he goes up the ladder, obviously being somehow telepathically guided somewhere. And he ends up in, of all places, Grand Central Station. And the people that he meets there they're humans, but they're mute. They don't speak. They only communicate through telepathy. And they're starting to ask him questions, and he's trying to give answers, and eventually it starts getting too much for him. They're asking him too many questions at once, and he says, "No, I can't take it." And finally they resort to speaking, and they tell him, who they are, and they're trying to get, questions answered as who he is, and, does he know Taylor, and, why did he come? He's trying to answer as best he can. He is separated from Nova, who is taken off and imprisoned. He is questioned by these elders, and then he sees a bizarre ceremony that they're going through. They're praying, and they say, "I reveal my inmost self unto my God." Their God is an atomic bomb, a gold atomic bomb with the letters Alpha and Omega on one of the fins. And they slowly peel back their faces, and they're actually masks, and they're all radiation scarred mutants, survivors apparently, or descendants, shall I say, of the nuclear war that destroyed mankind and resulted in the apes gaining sentience and gaining the power of speech, which we learn more about in the third movie. But in this one, they don't really explain it much, and it doesn't really need that much explanation. You can figure it out by yourself who these people are. They worship this bomb, as it were, as a god, because they don't really know what it is. And they make people fight telepathically. They destroy their enemies. They have their enemies destroy themselves by fighting telepathically. Meanwhile, General Aldo and his troops have discovered this entrance into the underground world. But on the way, then they've brought Dr. Zaius with them. They see all these hallucinations. They see an image of the lawgiver, and its eyes are bleeding, and they think it's an evil sign, a bad sign. They need to turn back. The horses start to panic, and Dr. Zaius says, "This is an abomination, and it's also a lie." And he rides into it, and the hallucinations vanish. And then they realize, they've been duped, basically, and they start going forward. They're determined that they're going to find and destroy any remnant humans who might have survived. Eventually, Brent discovers that Taylor is alive. He's being kept in a separate cell, and the mutants try to make he and Taylor kill themselves, but they fight against them, and they kill the mutant who's trying to get them to fight by slamming these metal doors that have these metal spikes in them. They pinion him between the two doors, and he's stabbed to death. They're going to try and, they're trying to find out what's going on, and the apes break into the city, and they start smashing things. The mutants, aside from their telepathic powers, have no defense. They can't fight. They're not trained to fight. They don't have any weapons, and the apes do have weapons. They have guns and machine guns, and they start gunning everybody down and smashing all their statues, which are all human statues, because to them, they're an abomination. And they are ravaging the city. Natalie Trundy is one of these mutants that kills herself rather than be killed by the mutants, and they discover her in a bathtub. And Charlton Heston, as Taylor, is trying to realize that what this bomb is that they worship is the doomsday weapon. It's got a cobalt casing which will ignite the atmosphere and destroy the whole world if it's set off. And he's trying to prevent that. The apes come in, they shoot all the mutants, they try to shoot at the bomb, and he says, "You can't shoot that thing, it's a bomb." They say, "Well, you can't shoot it down, we'll pull it down." And Gregory Sierra pulls it down, and it starts steaming like it's ready to launch, and I don't remember what happened. James Francisco tries to warn Taylor, and he's shot to death. Then Nova is shot to death, and Taylor says, "What's it all for?" He's very frustrated, and he's presumably shot to death. But he manages to crawl up to the launch crystal for the bomb, and Dr. Zayas says something, about, he says, "Can't we have peace?" And he says, "You humans don't know anything about peace. All you know is war." He says, "God damn you." And he pushes down the launch button, and the whole world is destroyed. And that's the end of the movie. And the voiceover says, "On a small green planet of an insignificant sun is now dead." And that should have been the last of the sequels, but it wasn't.